Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today I'm going to show you 6 fun ways you can use this pretty rose stamp from Paper Artsy to make some beautiful cards. This video is brought to you by TopFlightStamps.com. They scour the globe, find the coolest stamps, and bring them back to us here in the United States. Somebody told me once that they determine whether they'll buy a stamp set or not, depending on if they can use the stamp for 3 different cards or not. I thought that was a great idea, so I sat down with my supplies and I got to work. The first thing I tried when I started to make my cards was an embossed resist. So I inked my stamp up with clear embossing ink, and then I stamped it on my watercolor paper and heat embossed it with clear embossing powder. Originally, my plan was to color this with water-based markers, and I thought I'd have a beautiful resist look, but there's so much detail in this stamp that there wasn't enough uninked space for me to get a nice resist. So what I ended up doing was wetting the paper. I just sprayed water right over the marker that I had used, and I sprinkled in some pigment powder, and I'm using a combination of Ken Oliver Color Burst and Paper Artsy Fusions for this. After I was happy with the amount of color I had laid down, I set it aside to dry. For the next card background we're going to work on, I switched to glossy paper. It's kind of like photo paper, except the ink doesn't dry quickly on it, so it allows you to do techniques like resist. So I'm using that same Versamark ink pad again to stamp on my design. Make sure to heat set the ink or give it plenty of time to dry before going on to the next step. So what the Versamark ink does is leaves kind of like a greasy spot on the cardstock so that your ink won't stick. So I started off first with a sponge and applying some dye-based ink that way, but I'm not that great with a sponge, so it doesn't really look that great, but we are going to use this background on another card. So I went back to the old drawing board and decided to try this technique again stamping my stamps randomly over the glossy cardstock using clear Versamark ink, but this time we're going to try something different. After heat setting my ink, I grabbed a rainbow ink pad. This is the Kaleidocolor Jewel Tone ink pad, and I grabbed my trusty old soft rubber brayer. This is a technique I used to love to do and hadn't done it for a while, so basically what you want to do is roll your brayer over the ink pad so that you get this nice ombre ink on your brayer. Now this is going to use quite a bit of ink, so you have to keep rolling it over there until you fill it up. Then you turn the ink pad around and you do up the other side if your pad wasn't big enough to cover your entire brayer. You want to make sure you have plenty of ink on this brayer. Don't worry about ink waste because we will be doing another background with the leftover ink. Now this is important. For the best results, you want to only roll one way on your paper. So I am just rolling bottom to top, bottom to top, bottom to top. Don't go back and forth or you could end up picking up some ink. I don't know why, it just happens. So you want to keep rolling over that same spot, just going over your tracks over and over again until you feel like you've got a nice solid ink coverage in the background there. I reloaded my brayer so I would have enough ink to do the bottom half, and it's the same procedure. Just keep layering ink until you've got a nice solid background. I like to let the ink sit for about a minute, and then I grab a clean tissue and I just rub over the panel to remove any extra ink that could be sitting on top of the stamped area. So the Versamark ink that we stamped with created a resist by not allowing the ink to sink into the paper and stick there. You can try this with photo paper. It might work, it might not, but I bet you'll come up with some neat backgrounds if you try it. Speaking of neat backgrounds, I didn't want to waste all the ink that was still on my brayer, so I took a piece of cardstock, spritzed it with some water, and then I just rolled my inky brayer right over the cardstock. And isn't that a cool look? It looks like just like rainbow spatters, and then I'm just kind of shaking off the extra ink from my brayer right onto that background, and that's a great way to get a little more use out of your supplies. For this next card, I am taking Ranger Archival in sepia color, and I am stamping it on a craft card base. I'm basically going to stamp a bunch of the images from this scene to make kind of a collage, and the reason I am using Ranger Archival is because I will be using some water media over this, and I want to make sure the ink doesn't bleed. There was a popular technique many years ago called bleach stamping, where either people would make an ink pad using paper towels and bleach on a plate, or they would stamp an image and then color it in with bleach with a paintbrush. It was a really cool look, and I kind of wanted to emulate that, but I really didn't want to mess around with bleach. And I just so happened to have some gouache sitting on a plate in my studio, so I decided I would use gouache to highlight this image. Gouache is simply a white watercolor, so if you have a set of watercolors with a white in it, you can go ahead and use that. It's pretty much the same thing. This is titanium white gouache, so it might be a little bit more opaque, but honestly, for the sake of a card, you can use your white watercolor. It'll be just fine. So I went through and I highlighted all the images on this card, and I think it looks really pretty just the way it is. But you know me, I'm kind of allergic to leaving anything clean and simple, so I decided to grab my colored pencils and gently glaze over the image with shades of green and red. Now, the wonderful thing about this technique is that if you have colored pencils but you don't use them because you just feel like they're too tiring for your hands, or you have arthritis and they're just difficult for you to get the color you want, by having that white underneath, it really perks up the color and makes it look fabulous without a lot of pressure. You don't have to give any pressure when you're coloring, and the colors just pop because of that white underneath. Now, the other advantage of it being gouache has a very velvety matte finish to it, and the tooth of the gouache will actually grab your pigment really easily. So not only do you not have to press hard to use colored pencils over the gouache is almost like a sandpapery texture, and it pulls the pigment off of your pencils. So it's just so quick and easy. You can color it in a couple minutes, and it just looks phenomenal. And for this final card idea, we're going to be using Memento Ink because I intend to use my alcohol pens to do some coloring. So again, we're gonna ink her up and stamp her down. I have chosen a few different shades of green and pink. So I've got a light, medium, and dark of kind of an olive green tone, and I have a light, medium, dark of a rosy red tone. I like to start off with my dark shades, especially in green because it's an easy color to blend, and then go in with my mediums and then my lights. So colors like brown, green, blue, I can do this method. Colors like reds and purples, I need to do another method, which I'll show you in just a second. For the roses, I'm taking a different approach. I am going to color the entire flower with my light pink pro marker here. I'm using the chisel edge because I just want to lay down color quick. You don't need to be too fussy. You don't have to go right out to the edges. You just want to get a basic color down there so that your subsequent layers of ink have something to blend into. Now I'm taking my darkest red and I'm just kind of dancing around there in the shadows. Any place the stamp had like hatching lines, you know, the shadows that the stamp came with, I'm just laying some red over there, and then I'm going over with my mid-tone red and just kind of spreading out that dark. Now, because red is very finicky, I'm going to have to go back in with the paler pink color and spread those colors out a little bit more, just force them into submission a little bit, and that's how I did all of the pink flowers. Now, let's say you've colored something that is just so extraordinary, but you forgot to put something in the background and it's just looking a little naked there. Well, this is the technique for you. I'm going to show you how to put in a background using, again, our fabulous clear ink. I'm using Versamark brand, but any brand is just fine for this. And I'm going to stamp in a few background images with clear ink. You just got to make sure that your stamps are perfectly clean before you ink them up with clear, because it would show up on this white background. Don't worry about stamping over anything you've colored because you used permanent markers there, so that Versamark ink is not going to smudge your ink at all. So you can stamp with full abandon with your clear ink over your image. And here is where the magic happens, people. We're going to take some chalk and we're going to dab it on top of the places that we stamped. And don't worry if you dab chalk out of the lines, it doesn't matter. You just want to dab on chalk everywhere you've stamped something. The only rule is don't dab it on top of anything you colored with your markers. Even if you have ink there, just don't dab your chalk there and you're going to be fine. Now all you have to do is grab a clean tissue and rub the chalk into your design. So any of those, the leftover like chalk dust will get locked down to your paper onto the design that you stamped. And there you've got a very beautiful look there. I used a pearl chalk, so it's got a little shine to it as well. And if you want more, you can simply do some more stamping and some more chalk rubbing and you're good to go. Another magical thing you can do to your cards is to use a glue pen and some ultrafine clear glitter. I'm telling you, this is just the bomb. It looks so fabulous, and all you have to do is use your glue pen to just kind of outline some of the edges of your petals and leaves. Then just shake on a little ultrafine glitter, make sure it hits all of those glue lines you put in there, and voila, you have a fabulous, beautiful card. And this technique looks so good on so many different things, from landscapes, imagine like sparkling water in a stampscape scene, or any sort of bouquet. It's just lovely, and I hope you give it a try on your next card because it is really fabulous. Now let's turn these groovy backgrounds into some cool cards. So I'm going to start off by trimming 1/8 of an inch off of this card base here, but I'm going around the butterfly wing that I had colored. And that's just going to give me a little dimensional effect on my card, and then I'm just going to hand cut out the other portion of the wing there. This is a great technique to use anytime that you have planned on trimming down a panel, but you realized one of your elements kind of stick out into the border you were going to cut away. You can cut away the border, just leave that little element there. That's honestly what happened. I didn't have a great idea until after I'd made the mistake, and that's a lot of times how your great ideas come around. I mounted it onto some buttery yellow cardstock, and I thought this little banner would be really pretty, and I cut it out of white, and it did look a little stark there, so I'm just going to ink the edges with my Versamark ink pad. Boy, we're getting a lot of new ideas for the Versamark ink pad today, aren't we? And then I'm simply gonna ink the edges with some chalk. So I have a applicator that I had used for the cards I've been making anyway, so I'm pretty sure it's gonna be a close enough match. And there, you can just alter that like that and adhere it down with some foam tape. I thought some pearls or enamel dots would be the perfect accent to these cards, but I didn't have any, so I grabbed a couple hole punches and I punched some flat, small circles from some pink cardstock. Then I laid them on a piece of fun foam, and I used a ball and stylus to shape them into little half-round circles. Then, to adhere them to my cards so they wouldn't get crushed, I used my hot glue gun to apply a drop of glue. So you just want the tiniest little squeeze of glue, and then I kind of twirl in a spiral and lift it away so I don't get strings, and then I very carefully try to put the little faux enamel dot here onto the glue without burning myself or sticking it down weird. So that worked really well. I did realize a quick tip after I struggled with these tweezers for a while. I just took a ball and stylus and put some glue stick on the end of it, and then I was able to drop the little dots down a lot easier after that. So live and learn. And this is not for the faint of heart, I will warn you. You might want to use a slow drying wet glue. If you get glue strings, simply heat them up with a heat tool when you're done, and they'll just disappear. So little glue gun magic there for you. I left my dots as is, but if you wanted them shiny, you could give them a drop of nail polish on the top of the dot and you would be good to go. No one would be able to tell they weren't the real deal. I finished off the fancy glitter card pretty much the same way, except I put my adhesive on the card base rather than the back of the card because I just wanted to make sure that glitter had plenty of time to dry. As long as I left about a 1/4 of an inch on each side, I knew I would be good as far as placing my adhesive. I also finished this one off with a die cut with the word thank you or words thank you and a few of my fabulous faux dots. Now let's make a card with that fabulous leftover Brayer ink background that we did a little while ago. I'm stamping 3 butterflies with VersaFine black ink. That's a pigment ink, and the reason I'm using a pigment ink is so I can heat emboss. There's something really freeing about getting that bonus background when you're card making, and you kind of have this anything goes attitude towards it. So I'm using this glitter tinsel embossing powder that I've had for ages. It's so pretty. And I am just liberally sprinkling that on my image. Now remember, I can dump all that extra right back in the embossing powder container. Look at that sparkle! Oh my gosh, isn't that fun? And the cool thing is once you heat it, you actually get a little more sparkle. The thing to keep in mind though is not to overheat. So as soon as you see it start to change in appearance ever so slightly, start moving the gun away. It's kind of easy to scorch embossing powder that has glitter in it for whatever reason. I think the glitter particles might be mylar or something. I'm not sure. So just don't overheat or you'll ruin the effect. You just want to, you'll start to see it just get a little bit more sparkly. See how that top one's sparkling more than the other ones? And then you'll know that it's done and you'll have to move on. But you know, you might want to practice on a scrap if you've never done it before, but it's such a pretty effect. These final 4 cards are going to be finished up together. I apologize if it seems a little herky-jerky, but I took that first background we made with a Brusho and I chopped it in half so that it would be able to embellish 2 cards. Then I took that resist background that I did that didn't turn out that great with my sponge blending and decided to use that as a background because I think as an abstract background it looked pretty cool and the colors matched pretty well because I was creating them all at the same time. And then I'm taking half of the Brusho background and just mounting it on top of the the crazy weird resist, Versamark resist on glossy cardstock background. I'm just going to add a simple thank you on the card in there. I've got a very quick and easy thank you note card that is handy to have on hand. You want to send somebody a quick note, that's the perfect card to do it. And it's nice and flat and small and won't require extra postage. For the other card, pretty much the same thing, except I just mounted it on a plain card base. And as you can see, those card bases that I bought in bulk are really getting some love. I think at this pace, I will be through them in another couple of weeks. But still, they're lovely little cards, and they'd be really handy next time you need a quick note. Here is a glossy background that we did with the Brayer. I really love that technique, but I noticed that my stamp kind of skipped in the middle there, so to try to disguise that, I'm going to wrap some metallic thread around the whole panel, and I'm going to make sure it covers that area. It will, I think, accent it and also just kind of be pretty and hide that little spot where it didn't stamp. The other thing that I noticed about this card that I didn't realize when I was stamping, because I'd never stamped these stamps before, is that I stamped the flowers upside down, or I stamped the words upside down, whichever way you want to call it. But anyway, it's a little awkward because of that. So by distracting with an element like a string, I can salvage this card, and again, I'm going to end up with another cute little note card. I'm also going to use that gold card base. I got a bunch of card bases that had like flat spots in the middle of the front. I don't know why I bought them, honestly, but I realized that if I just want a peak of a border of gold, they're perfect. It doesn't matter what's in the middle. So I've been using those up at a pretty steady clip as well. And last but not least, we return to the butterfly. That was weird editing, wasn't it? And I went around to the corners and punched a little notch punch, and that is really handy for doing strings. So basically what that punch does is it makes these two little ticks on each side of the corner, and you could do that with a pair of scissors. You don't have to have this punch. But the nice thing is that I can weave my thread around, and it gives me like an outline, like the whole panel will have kind of like this outline of metallic thread, except for the little corners where the notches are. So give that a try. You don't need to have the punch, like I said. Go ahead and just make a little mark, a little cut on either side of the corner and weave your thread through, and it's just a really elegant border. I think it looks really nice when you have just kind of like a simple or modern looking card. And I just had a little adhesive on the back to kind of catch the thread, and then I'm just going to use my double-sided tape to adhere that down to a silver card base, because I think the metallic looks nice with the glitter, and you just don't want to go too overboard when you get that much glitter going on. And as a final touch, I just added that little thank you banner at the bottom to finish it off. And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to find the stamps I used, you can find them at our sponsor, topflightstamps.com. Don't forget to use the coupon code in the video description to save 10% on your order, and remember, US orders over 50 ship free. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoy these videos where I show you many techniques for one stamp set or a bunch of ways to use a certain product, let me know in the comments below. If it's way too overwhelming and too much stuff, let me know that too. I'd love to know. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it. Until next time, happy crafting.